Hello, my friend. It's time for us to meet this Sunday tour of the National Palace of Queluz and learn a little more about how the history of Portugal and Brazil. Let's go in.
Here, Dom João VI, Prince Regent, son of Queen Maria and Carlota Joaquina, lived here. He only left here one day before General Genovo and Napoleon's troops invaded Lisbon. He tricked Napoleon and went to Brazil. This bed is the alpha and omega in the story of Pedro, who proclaimed Brazil's independence and imposed a liberal, constitutional monarchy in Portugal. Pedro was born in this bed here in the Palace of Queluz and died in this bed at the age of 36 from tuberculosis. Pedro was born in the Portuguese. Pedro left here when he was 9 years old when the French arrived. I can only imagine how much he walked through these palace gardens. And to end this visit, I want to show you the Dona Maria Ira Pavilion, which has been used to receive visiting foreign heads of state for free since 1957. Our President Sardem stayed in the Dona Maria Pavilion, right? He must have really liked it. I took pictures there. The gardens are wonderful, right? Well, the Queen of England, Elizabeth II, stayed there, or Isabel II, as the Portuguese say, right? King Juan Carlos of Spain also stayed there, President, right? Nowadays, you can only go there with a guided tour. So, President Lula stayed in a hotel, a very expensive hotel, right? A very luxurious one on Avenida Liberdade. The Tivoli, as the Portuguese say, right? They say that the daily rate was equivalent to our $30,000, right? Our $30,000 a day. In fact, now in England it was much more than that, right? From what I saw on the news, our $95,000 are $1,000 a year, where the president of Brazil stayed, right? A rich country can spend that, right? They're charging us more and more taxes, right? Well, anyway, speaking of England, the meeting with the king, right? It was the day before, he talked to the head of state. Here in Portugal, his name is King Charles I. They respect the Portuguese language a lot, we still call him Charles. And I saw headlines in the newspapers, right? Well, King Charles's challenges are to modernize the monarchy and attract young people. I was thinking, what does that mean? Are you able to know what that means? Modernize the monarchy. The monarchy certainly already uses the digital world, right, and other things. Attract young people for what? For the monarchy. Well, yeah, sometimes it's because of lack of things to do that the guy invents, right? Well, the inventor is the one who invents, not the journalist. But the meeting with the head of government, with the prime minister, resulted in a promise, according to the newspapers, of $1 billion equivalent to $1 billion more for the Amazon fund. Wow, that's a good thing. It must be for lampposts. For riverside dwellers, it must be for schools for Amazonian children. It must be to combat drug trafficking, which is increasing more and more in the Amazon. I don't know if it will be for NGOs. Well, the CPI of the ones is finally going to start, which was ready to work, but the CPI of the circus was put in its place by order of the Supreme Court. Autonomous powers, independent of each other. The Supreme Court ordered a CPI and the Senate said, yes, sir. In fact, it was a Supreme Court justice who ordered it, and then the Supreme Court plenary confirmed it, right? But then it was just pro forma and they created that CPI of the circus that even today, reality is contesting the things that the CPI tried to impose on the country. I'll talk about this later, but then there will be a CPI of NGOs. It will come at the right time to find out, after all, what they are doing there. Why are there so many NGOs in the Amazon and not in the Northeast, where there are people, many more people, well, and the need, right? Just look, 14 dead already in the Anamana area. One health agent of indigenous ethnicity and the others were all minors, including the last body found of a woman who had been strangled. The government made that advertisement, propaganda, and then went on to the logistics for the removal of 20,000 minors. It was hampered by the burning of the planes, the burning of their houses. They burned everything, right? People even ask me, but why doesn't Brazil use these planes and helicopters for other things, right? Since if there is a seizure, right? But anyway, they burned the ships like the Spanish did when they arrived in Mexico, right? And there is no way out. And that was predicted at the beginning, back in January. It was predicted that indigenous people and miners would end up meeting. And here is the result, 14 deaths. Who is responsible, right? Well, let's move on. Well, talking about other political issues in Brazil this weekend, the former Minister of Justice, former Secretary of Security of the Federal District, right, Anderson Torres, right, literally rotting in prison, right, he received visits as established by Minister Alexander de Moraes. Apparently he is also a judge of execution. Well, 5 on Saturday, 5 on Sunday, 5 senators on Saturday, 5 on Sunday. He authorized senators, except for Senator Flavio Bolsonaro and Senator Marcos Duval. The others went there and were shocked by his situation, who will testify this Monday at the federal police. Well, there are some others, since I'm talking about issues there at the Supreme Court, right? Lieutenant Colonel Mauro City is still in prison, right? Well, he's in a military organization. Now, I find it strange, because I see here it is Article 74 of the military statute. It is from Law 6880. If you want to look it up, it says that a police officer, a military officer, can only be arrested by the civil police in flagranti delicto, and can only be held at the police station or at the police station for the time necessary to draw up the report. Then, they have to hand him over to a military organization. He is there in the military organization, but before that he went through all of this that we saw there, right? Another issue is that the Supreme Court overturned a pardon granted by the President of the Republic to Daniel Silveira, who received a sentence that was way too excessive, but anyway, that is another issue. The issue is the pardon, is that Article 84, right? In 12 it says that it is the exclusive competence of the President of the Republic to grant pardons and commute sentences. I saw that in the judgment they talk about implicit constitutional limits. Folks, the Constitution has to be something explicit. And the President of the Constituent Assembly himself realized this. The Constitution, the Citizen Constitution, speaks for itself. The Constitution is explicit. I don't think there should be implicit things in the Constitution. I can only see the explicit. That's what I read to you a little while ago. Well, I see here that an Estadão in an editorial is realizing these things, right? Well, because they took away his passport, the Supreme Court took away former President Bolsonaro's passport, so he no longer has special jurisdiction. He is the first instance, but it was the Supreme Court that took it away. With that, his importance here in Portugal and Europe even grew, because Chega, which was preparing, now on May 13th and 14th, a meeting, of the European Right or the World Right, cancelled the symposium, the meeting, and will postpone it until Bolsonaro can come here to Portugal. So, it showed the importance of this. I even found out the details, because I visited the parliament on Friday. And here's this photo, me with a group from Chega. By the way, one of the people in the group, Congressman Bruno Nunes, told me something that I only saw with security, from the American president, from the president, back in the Gayson government, right, that he was pushing journalists, security guards. He told me that he was demonstrating against the president of Brazil inside the plenary on April 25th, and a security guard for the president of Brazil looked at the Chega bench and said, "Shut up." He looked and asked, "What do you mean?" Then, according to the congressman, from Chega, he opened the Pareto to show the gun inside the Portuguese parliament, right? Well, anyway, this is a passing subject. I wanted to say that I was talking about the editorial in Estadão, which says, the Supreme Court has exceeded all limits, right? Oh, well, any investigation has to have a specific purpose and a specific date and a deadline to finish, right? And we see there what they're doing about that investigation that didn't have a public prosecutor's office, right? Based on, right, an internal regulation of the Supreme Court, right? It went over the Constitution and it's still there, right? It's still there. The Estadão says the following, right? That the judge has universal jurisdiction, right? That the fake news investigation has even been used to arbitrate debates on bills, right? Well, the two Moraes investigations are in disagreement with the law, with the Constitution itself, with the jurisprudence of the Federal Supreme Court, right? Well, I'm seeing here that right now, right? I talked about Anderson Torres rotting in prison. He met with senators on Saturday and Sunday, 5 on Saturday, and the 5th on Sunday. And by order of Alexander Moraes, he did not give permission for Senators Flavio Bolsonaro and André Duval to visit him. He will testify at the federal police this Monday, right? And they have already finished, and there is a majority to judge and consider defendants. And it's quite mathematical. 50 for execution and 200 for incitement, right? So there are already 550 judges, the next 250 will be. There are 590 missing to complete the 1,390 indicted, of which 239 for execution and 150 for incitement. André Mendonça voted, he voted against, right? He said that he would only agree to consider defendants those who actually destroyed things, right? Crimes against public property, that the others exercised the freedom of expression of opinion that is in the Constitution. But anyway, this is a part of the Constitution that seems to have been revoked, right? He also said that there is no evidence or individualization of the conduct. In other words, there is no minimum due process. So, anyway, those who are charged will have to have evidence against them, testimony against them, and each one of them will have to testify. 1390, right? Anyway, well, we'll see what happens. And that's all. I really miss hearing from two very important people in the Constituent Assembly that I covered. Constituent Assembly 88, the Rapporteur Bernardo Cabral and the Rapporteur of the committee, the President and Rapporteur of the Systematization Committee, who was the one who put the Constitution in place, Nelson Jobinho. He was once President of the Supreme Court, he was Minister of Justice. What's missing is their word on these events, right? And the people there went to the barracks, right? They should talk to the Senate, because all of this depends on the Senate. It's in the hands of the President of the Senate, President Rodrigo Pacheco, right? It's up to him. The good news is that there will also be a CPI on vaccines, right? I see here that everything that the COVID CPI discussed did not discuss the efficacy of vaccines. Now the Financial Times is reporting on something that is a big issue here in Europe. I heard this issue in the Portuguese parliament, right, about the vaccines themselves, right, especially Pfizer, but the others too, right, they want to know about the contracts, how the vaccine contracts work. And I see that the COVID CPI did not talk about the vaccine contract, right? So now the Financial Times is saying that 70 million doses of Pfizer were cancelled, right? That Pfizer wants to charge at least half of the value of them, right? Because the order was cancelled, right? You must know that the WHO considered that it was over, right? The pandemic is over. So, maybe this CPI is a new CPI to really find out what happened, right? Because there was a lot of money in this and we need to know. Well, today was a lot of talk and I hope to see you tomorrow in Lisbon. Alexander Garcia.
Hello, my friend. It's time for us to meet this Tuesday, April 15th. On April 15th, in 1912, in the waters of this North Atlantic Ocean, the Titanic sank, the greatest maritime tragedy in history, because in these same waters there is much joy, many victories for Brazilians in surfing. That's because I'm here in one of the world capitals of surfing. I'm in Ericeira and the names of Brazilians are very well known here. Waters of the North Atlantic, just like in life. On one side, tragedy, on the other side, joy on the waves. Don't forget to subscribe and at the end to like or dislike. Well, Bolsonaro is already walking alone, supported by Michelle. The image we saw today is quite symbolic, right? He needs to walk, including to stimulate the functions of the body, right? For example, if he has his physiological system functioning normally, if you know what I mean, it's because he's returning to normal, but there will never be normality like there was before Adelio's stabbing, right? Luckily, he's a strong man, right? He resisted, he didn't die, right? And he's resisting all these surgeries that make the problem even worse, right? It's become a chronic problem. Adelio's stabbing is a chronic problem. The stabbing is repeated every day in Jair Messias Bolsonaro's body. It will be for the rest of his life. And I hope it's the last surgery, but the medical view of the situation is that adhesions will appear over time. He needs, for example, to change his eating habits, right? His closest friends, his own wife, Michelle, right? Have been insisting with him for a long time, but it's no use, he's like that, he likes to eat, let's say, junk food, right? Those things that we find there, like hamburgers, pastries, made to order, fat and soda, right? Those things that are not good for the health of a person who suffered so much that he suffered this and that stabbing. Now I wonder, right, talking to the people at the time in the chamber, right? The speaker of the chamber was Rodrigo Maia, right? Rodrigo Maia had the legislative police really investigate, and from which office did the record of Adelio Bispo's presence come from at the same time and on the same day that he stabbed himself there in Juiz de Fora? If he didn't insist, why? Personal reasons, family reasons, why would he have the power to go all the way, right? Then an investigation is carried out, right, involving a police investigation by the federal police, which asks for information from the legislative police and nothing turns up, right? Things that are now appearing, we have to insist on this because it is not possible that Adelio had the power to record his presence in the Chamber of Deputies while he was in Juiz de Fora. That doesn't exist, right? There is no fiction that can record this. Well, going back to Bolsonaro, he is stabbed every day, he is ineligible by the Superior Electoral Court, he is a defendant by the Supreme Court, he is no longer the President of the Republic. He should be a defendant in the first instance, but he is. And then, what will happen in 2006? In 2026, right, in the presidential election for senators, 2/3 of the Senate, governors, Chamber of Deputies, legislative assemblies. What is the solution that voters will give the country? Voters are not satisfied with the current situation of impoverishment of the poor, increasingly creating dependence of the poor on the paternalism of the government. Bolsa Familia, for example, has 7 million families that have been addicted to it for more than 10 years and they are not leaving. President Lula himself, feeling this, mentioned today in a visit he made to an automobile manufacturer that he cannot have Bolsa Familia forever. Of course not, right? It would just be an emergency. But if people had access to real education, education would be equal for everyone, training in professions, encouraging work, because that is even in the government's interest, because those who work pay taxes, and those who work more pay more taxes, right? So, what we see is that a minority that is paying taxes to support a majority is reaching this point. There are no accounts that can handle it, nor people who can handle it. So, electing 2/3 of the Senate from the center-right, from a large coalition, with the end of radicalism on both sides. The PT can't do anything alone anymore, much less a party like PSOL, right? A party that is too far to the left, right? Just as radical parties on the other side wouldn't be able to elect 2/3 of the Senate alone either. Why? To correct the Supreme Court's flaws. The Supreme Court doesn't have the vote to do what it's doing. It can't make laws, it can't change the Constitution, it can't take the initiative to conduct investigations and proceedings. That's up to the public prosecutor's office. This is a trend that emerged once, if I'm not mistaken, in Germany, right, where some people liked it in the Supreme Court and decided to apply it. I'm saying this because now the Supreme Court plenary said, no, right? The defense of one of the defendants in the Felipe Martins case. Look, it can't be Zanin, who is Lula's lawyer, it can't be in the first group, which is only 5, it's not even half of the Supreme Court. It can't be Dino, who hates Bolsonaro, just like Moraes. It's not the Supreme Court itself that decides, yes, it can't. We can. They judge themselves because they are supreme, and if they judge themselves because they are supreme and there is no one to decide above them, that's called absolutism. That's why we need to have a stronger, more independent Senate. We see that the harmony between powers is no longer working. What we see in the news is that Supreme Court ministers are pressuring deputies who signed the urgent request for the amnesty bill. The couple Gaz and Lindbergh the leader and Giz the Minister of Government Policy, saying that it is absurd that deputies and allies of the government, from the government base, from parties that have to appoint ministers in place of the president himself, have signed the request for urgency. Yes, so what? They will remove it, because if they remove it and lose the support of these so-called centrist parties, they will have a maximum of 25%, at most in a round calculation of deputies, votes. So they can't even change that. And finally, some news from the Hungarian parliament. The Hungarian parliament is banning gay pride in Hungary and saying that, as it is written in Genesis, male and female created them. There is no other sex. Gender ideology talks about gender. Gender is masculine and feminine in grammar, right? In biology it is sex. Masculine and feminine. You are born a boy or a girl and there is no way to change it. They say there is hormone treatment or something else that takes 60 years. But surgeries are crazy, right? It's crazy when you do this to a child and when you encourage them to do it. That's why the Hungarian parliament also said that child protection is a priority issue for the Hungarian state, the family, the authorities and teachers. Because disrespecting a child, suggesting a sex change is stupid, cruel, crazy, and if there's a need for treatment, it's psychological treatment, which often, imposes doubts on the minds of children who still don't understand anything about the world. That's very cruel, very cruel. Leave it to Portugal, Alexander Garcia.
Olá, minha amiga, meu amigo. Hora do nosso encontro nesta terça-feira, 16 de abril. Eu vou contar para vocês 2 fatos de 16 de abril do passado e vocês vão perceber que a gente copia o passado, a gente repete o passado. 16 de abril de 1961, Fidel Castro, depois de tomar o governo em Cuba, de derrubar o ditador Fulgêncio Batista, diz que, olha, eu sou marxista, leninista e o regime aqui em Cuba vai ser comunista. Enganou o mundo inteiro. Inclusive Estados Unidos, que deram apoio pensando que ele era um democrata derrubando um ditador. Enganou o repórter do New York Times, chegou a dar um livro sobre essa história. Fez uma grande reportagem para o Fidel Castro, comoveu os Estados Unidos. Enganou todo mundo. E no dia 16 de abril de 1986, se não me 86, Congresso brasileiro não tinha outra saída, teve que aprovar o plano cruzado do presidente Sarney, que saiu em 28 de fevereiro, já congelando tudo, não tinha como voltar atrás. Fim da inflação por decreto, congelando, por medida provisória. Simplesmente congelou os preços. Enterrou as leis de mercado, que são leis naturais. Criou os fiscais do Sarney, que prendiam gerente de supermercado, gerente de farmácia, arbitrariamente. Ditadura explícita. Polícia Federal entrava sem mandato de metralhadora no pasto para prender boi gordo. O cruzeiro, 1.000 cruzeiros passou a valer 1 cruzeiro. O menino Alexandre Garcia, que ganhava do avô dele um presente de aniversário todos os anos, tinha uma reserva de equivalente a 70 mil dólares. E nesses planos econômicos do Estado brasileiro, que iam cortando zeros, ficou devendo R$2. Porque iam cortando zero. O Estado brasileiro roubou de um menino, roubou de muita gente, cortando zero. Durou 9 meses. Quando terminou, a inflação já estava 370% ao ano. Quando começou, estava 570%. Finalmente veio o Plano Real, mais centrado, deixou de ser plano, hoje é cotidiano. Mas vejam, esse é o Brasil. Vamos aos fatos de hoje. Não esqueça de se inscrever se ainda não fez isso. E ao final de deixar o gostei ou não gostei. Bom, o primeiro assunto de hoje é a economia brasileira. As autoridades fazendárias do governo anunciaram que, olha, aquilo que a gente disse, meta fiscal de 0,5% do PIB, de superávit no ano que vem, não vai ser mais. Mas olha, vai ser 0% de déficit, o que significa 0% de superávit, não é? Bom, além disso, recorde no aumento da dívida pública. Em 14 meses de governo, o atual governo acrescentou 1 trilhão e 77 bilhões na dívida pública. Isso é recorde. O Poder 360, que é uma excelente agência de notícia, fez uma comparação com os governos anteriores. O governo Lula aumentou 1 trilhão e 77 bilhões nos primeiros 14 meses. O governo Bolsonaro, nos primeiros 14 meses, 339 bilhões. 1/3. O governo Temer, nos primeiros 14 meses, que pegou o resto do governo Dilma, 608 bilhões. E o governo Dilma, 765 bilhões nos seus primeiros 14 meses. Consequência disso, o real se desvalorizando em relação ao dólar. Se desvalorizou mais em abril agora que o peso argentino, o peso do Milei. O peso argentino, no tempo do governo peronista, esquerdista, perdia feio em relação ao dólar e em relação ao real. Pois agora o peso argentino se desvalorizou menos que o real. E aí não tem dinheiro para pagar funcionário, professor, greve em 48 universidades federais do Brasil. Uma é greve só de servidor, outra é greve de professor, outra é greve dos dois, e mais os institutos federais, que são 71 em greve, e o Pedro II do Rio de Janeiro também, né? Além de dinheiro, querem revogar decisões do Ministério da Educação na área federal, do governo Temer e do governo Bolsonaro. Né? Bom, fosse só a economia, né? Na saúde, os casos de dengue estão em 3 trilhões. Perdão, 3 milhões. É tanto trilhão de dívida. 3 milhões de pessoas. Isso é recorde histórico. E mais 1.120 mortes por aí. Não é como a Covid, que era um vírus desconhecido. Ninguém sabia como tratar, depois souberam como tratar. Né? O tratamento é absolutamente eficaz. Né? Mas todo mundo correndo atrás não sabia o que fazer. Dengue não. Dengue se sabe, se conhece. E ainda assim, 3 milhões de casos. Casos terríveis de dengue hemorrágica. Né? Bom, enquanto isso, o INCRA aprova lá um assentamento lá em Tabocão, Goiás. Pegou 724 hectares da fazenda Sinuelo, pelo nome de gaúchos, que foram lá plantar. O nome do assentamento do MST é Olga Benário. Sabem quem é? Dê uma olhadinha no livro Os Camaradas, do William Vac. Ele conta que ela, alemã, militante comunista, foi acusada de assassinar um policial, aí fugiu para a União Soviética, lá ela entrou na KGB, foi feita oficial da Força Aérea, e deram a missão de cuidar do Luiz Carlos Prestes no Brasil, porque ele recebia dinheiro de Moscou, queriam saber se ele estava gastando direito. Afinal, segundo o livro do William Vac, ele dizia que os cangaceiros eram guerrilha comunista que precisava de dinheiro, e o dinheiro vinha. Ela acabou casando com Luiz Carlos Prestes, depois presa, o Supremo aprovou a extradição dela, né? Todo mundo culpa o ditador Getúlio, mas foi a justiça brasileira. Aprovou a extradição, ela foi para a Alemanha e foi executada lá. Bom, só para contar essa história. Né? Imprensa americana, Wall Street Journal, tem uma ampla reportagem sobre a situação de liberdade de expressão no Brasil, e redes sociais, e Alexandre de Moraes, Elon Musk. Né? O título é Democracia no Brasil está morrendo à luz do dia. Por que será que puseram esse título? O editor do Wall Street Journal? Certamente porque está todo mundo vendo. Menos a mídia omissa, calada. Temos aí exceções, todo mundo está comentando, os editoriais da Folha de São Paulo e do Estadão. Né? Mas, de um modo geral, estão aplaudindo a censura, porque a censura pega a rede social que está sendo a concorrente das mídias tradicionais, que não sabem o que fazer, porque todo mundo virou repórter. Né? Todo mundo ganhou finalmente voz, não é só a voz própria do corpo, é a voz que ele consegue projetar através do mundo digital. Né? É uma novidade, eles não entenderam ainda essa novidade. Mas o Wall Street Journal está dizendo isso. Democracia no Brasil morre à luz do dia. E o Economist está dizendo, está mostrando que o Supremo está legislando sobre rede social, quando não é um poder legislativo. O poder legislativo é o Congresso Nacional. Lá no Congresso Nacional, hoje, um jornalista americano, Glenn Greenwald, depôs sobre esses casos todos. A gente nota na Câmara dos Deputados que há todos os ingredientes para Arthur Lira, né, instalar, já tem o pedido para isso, e as assinaturas suficientes, a CPI do abuso da autoridade. De Lisboa, Alexandre Garcia. Olá, minha amiga, meu amigo. Chegou a hora do nosso encontro. Nesta quinta-feira, 23 de novembro, nos Estados Unidos, o grande feriado. Dia Nacional de Ação de Graças. Thanksgiving Day. Lembra dos aqueles que chegaram no Mayflower, os peregrinos, quando agradeceram em ação de graças a comida, né, ao peru na mesa. É a maior festa, é mais do que Natal. As casas já estão todas enfeitadas nos Estados Unidos, já foram enfeitadas agora, ficam enfeitadas até o Natal. Aqui em Brasília a gente lembra do que cai do céu nessa época do ano e dá para comer, manga. O Paulo Pestana, que é o cronista da cidade, é o prazer da leitura é ler crônicas do Paulo Pestana no Correio Brasiliense. Ele é uma espécie assim de Paulo Mendes Campos, Fernando Sabino, né? E ele lembra, olha, cai do céu a manga e está verde, e verde é dura, batendo na cabeça é quase como uma pedra. Eu tenho um carro que eu comprei 0 km em 1995, ele tinha uns 200 km apenas e caiu uma manga, tem uma moça até hoje, marcando essa relíquia que eu tenho. Bom, mas num 23 de novembro, em 1891, foi a primeira revolta da Armada. Custódio de Melo ameaçou bombardear o Rio de Janeiro. E, com isso, Deodoro renunciou. A Marinha se revoltou com a administração Deodoro. Era aquela coisa, saiu o imperador, todo mundo se dava bem com o imperador, entrou a República, não foi uma demanda popular, Deodoro cai, entra Floriano, que foi mão de ferro muito mais. Florianópolis era a ilha do Desterro, ganhou o nome em homenagem a Floriano. E, num 23 de novembro, em 1935, foi 35? Foi, a revolta comunista, chamada Intentona Comunista. Natal, Recife, Rio de Janeiro. Traição, mortos enquanto dormiam na Praia Vermelha. O governo reagiu e acabou a intentona, mas Natal durou 4 dias, por exemplo. Bom, não esqueça de se inscrever e de conferir, porque está cheio de gente aí dizendo que estava inscrita e desapareceu a inscrição. E ao final de deixar o gostei ou não gostei. Bom, acabamos de falar em revolta, parece que temos uma revolta. Supremo versus Legislativo. Começou com a votação no Senado, votaram os 2 turnos, deu o mesmo resultado. Em 81 senadores, 71 estavam presentes, um não votou, o presidente da casa, que só vota em caso de desempate, e deu 52-18. Passando pelo Senado, a proposta de emenda constitucional que limita poderes do Supremo. Um ministro do Supremo só não pode dar uma liminar que derrube decisões tomadas pela maioria do Poder Legislativo. E aí a minha colega, temos o mesmo tempo de jornalismo, respeitável, experiente, Eliane Cantanhede, no Estadão, ela escreveu o seguinte, eu vou ler para vocês, e aí já causou. Ministros do Supremo Tribunal Federal protestaram nos bastidores contra o voto do líder do governo no Senado, Jacques Wagner, do PT da Bahia. Só para lembrar, Jacques Wagner, líder do governo no Senado, votou a favor dessa PEC. Foi o único do PT que votou a favor, os outros votaram contra. Ele votou a favor. Protestaram pelo voto do líder do governo, né, a favor da PEC que limita os poderes da Corte, aprovada nesta quarta-feira, 22 por 52 votos a 18. Sob condição de anonimato, magistrados da Corte, ela está falando no plural, e ela é uma jornalista confiável, ela não é nenhuma iniciante. Tem mais de 50 anos de jornalismo como eu. Sob condição de anonimato, magistrados da Corte consideraram que o endosso de Wagner à proposta ela pôs entre aspas, portanto são palavras deles, traição rasteira, depois da resistência feita pelo Supremo ao que definiram como golpe bolsonarista. Então eles estão justificando o seguinte, nós aquilo que acreditamos, eles classificaram em golpe bolsonarista. Eles acreditaram que haveria um golpe bolsonarista e agiram, né, com o apoio de Jacques Wagner do PT, líder do governo. Porque se Jacques Wagner os traiu, então estavam juntos em alguma coisa, numa trama que era a resistência contra o golpe bolsonarista. Ou seja, isso revela algo maior, né? Continua a Eliane Cantanhede no Estadão. A postura do senador Jacques Wagner, levou a um ultimato do Supremo. Aspas. Ou o Jacques Wagner sai ou não tem mais papo do STF com o Planalto e o governo. Fecha aspas. Gravíssimo. E incrível, digno de crédito, porque a jornalista é confiável. Então, tem papo entre esses dois poderes, algum acordo, e dá um ultimátum. Ó, tira o Jacques Wagner, que, aliás, disse que não queria ofender o Supremo com esse voto. Wagner foi o único senador petista a ir contra o próprio partido que orientou pelo voto não. É Humberto Costa, é o líder do PT. Wagner é o líder do governo. A PEC teve 3 votos a mais do que os 49 que são necessários para sua aprovação. Isso explodiu, né, revelando que havia um acordo de coisas que aconteceram, decisões do Supremo, para tirar o golpe bolsonarista, o suposto, né? E com Jacques Wagner, PT, o governo, juntos. Senão não chamaria de traição. Traição é quando se espera alguma coisa de alguém e esse alguém faz outra coisa e era nosso parceiro e não é mais, né? E aí foi uma gritaria no Congresso. Bom, aí temos o ministro Barroso falou como presidente do Supremo, né? Tentou, talvez, botar alguma água fria na fervura, dizendo, olha, o Supremo não é problema. Estão deixando de lado outros problemas, como crime organizado, mudanças climáticas. Aí eu disse, opa, esse é o problema. É o Supremo pensar que pode legislar sobre crime organizado, sobre clima e crime, aborto, drogas, em detrimento do poder legislativo. Esse é o problema. O Supremo é intérprete das leis que o legislativo faz. O Supremo não é legislativo. E o legislativo pode até mudar a Constituição, menos cláusulas pétreas que o Supremo mudou durante a pandemia. Não só mudou, como transferiu a prefeitos e governadores o poder de mudar, um poder que não tinha e não tem. E ninguém tem, a não ser uma Assembleia Constituinte. Não. Bom, aí veio o decano Gilmar Mendes, como porta-voz do Supremo. Eu tenho aqui trechos importantes das falas do decano. Ele diz o seguinte: esta corte não haverá de submeter-se ao tacão autoritário, venha de onde vier, ainda que escamoteado pela pseudo-representação de maiorias eventuais. Está se referindo ao Senado. Senado que tem poderes para julgar ministros do Supremo. Estou certo de que os autores dessa empreitada começaram travestidos de estadistas presuntivos e a encerraram melancolicamente como inequívocos pigmeus morais. Pesadão. E avisa. Gilmar Mendes falando em nome do Supremo como decano. Este Supremo está preparado para enfrentar, uma vez mais, e caso necessário, as investidas desmedidas e inconstitucionais agora provenientes do Poder Legislativo. Direto. Não tem sujeito oculto. Recados das ruas chegam a todos nós, dando conta que o projeto aprovado é mal menor, como forma de impedir possíveis reformas ainda mais drásticas ao funcionamento da Corte, ou mesmo a instauração de processos de impeachment contra membros desse tribunal. Interessante a gente recordar que o Supremo fez de tudo aí para bloquear. Bolsonaro queria destruir o Supremo, Barroso se referiu a isso já. Só que o Bolsonaro não fez nada, nada disso que agora está sendo feito. Nada, nada. Só parole, parole, parole. Saliva. É preciso altivez para rechaçar esse tipo de ameaça de maneira muito clara. Esta casa não é composta por covardes. Cumpre dizê-lo com sinceridade, mas com firmeza. Esse tribunal não admite intimidações. Recado do decano do Supremo para o Congresso Nacional, para o Poder Legislativo. Gente, eu pego a Constituição e no seu 2º artigo fala dos poderes nessa ordem. Legislativo, em primeiro lugar, executivo em segundo e judiciário em último, porque o judiciário não tem a representação popular. E diz que eles são independentes e harmônicos entre si. Não estão sendo independentes, porque o Legislativo tem se queixado muito do Supremo se metendo em questões legislativas. E agora a harmonia virou uma cacofonia. E aí eu pergunto, se houver choque entre os poderes, quem é o poder moderador? O Papa? Pedro II, que não está mais? Fica no ar. Né? Hoje foi só esse assunto, porque é uma questão institucional. Com palavras, agora, por exemplo, a PEC já foi para a Câmara. Depois da fala de Gilmar, qual é a posição da Câmara? Ficar de joelhos e dizer sim, senhor? Ou aprovar a PEC? Deixar no arquivo, fingir que o brasileiro vai esquecer? Botar na gaveta? A Câmara agora está interlupus et muris, entre o lobo e o muro. De Brasília, Alexandre Garcia.
Hello, my friends. Happy 22nd. 2022 is starting. Sunday, January 2nd. The highlight of Sunday is our conversation. Today is Sanitarians' Day. So, obviously, we remember Adolfo Lutz, Osvaldo Cruz, Carlos Chagas, Vital Brazil, João Batista Reis. A day to celebrate the great sanitarians we've had here in Brazil. Yeah, 2022 is the year of the tiger in China. 22 is the year of the tiger. Well, and on a positive note, today the founder of Parmalat died. He founded Parmalat in Parma, right? His father was a ham producer, Prosciutto of Parma, who's a beauty, right? Callisto Tanzi, 83 years old, he had 131 factories worldwide, 36,000 employees, right? He started when he was 22. He sponsored Palmeiras. Palmeiras is the national championship, the Brazilian Cup, and the South American Championship. It was a good time for Palmeiras. He also sponsored Formula One and ended up giving in to politicians, like Marcelo Odebrecht did here, and he was arrested, sentenced to 17 years, right? He died of pneumonia that has nothing to do with coronavirus. Well, talk about it, right? Don't forget to subscribe and leave your like or dislike at the end. The public consultation promoted by the Ministry of Health on its website about childhood vaccination ends tonight and Sunday. I mentioned public health specialist João Batista Riz Jr. earlier. He was the man who, leading health initiatives at the Ministry of Health in 1979, ended polio in Brazil, eliminated polio. I met with him this morning and asked him about mandatory vaccination. We eliminated polio without requiring mandatory vaccination. That's right. And speaking of vaccines, the mandatory vaccination certificate, everyone was required to present a full vaccination record on 3 Costa cruise ships, the Preciosa, the Esplendida, and the Costa de Adema. And there are about 180 cases on board, and all the ships are at a standstill. Passengers are complaining that they're stuck in their cabins, that they can't even access alcoholic beverages, etc. It's become a prison. And then Anvisa is saying it's the travel agency's fault. I don't understand, right? By the way, I have the official numbers here because they're from the Brazilian Civil Registry. This is an official number, not a guess, right? In 2021, we had 404,821 deaths. Nobody dies without a civil registration, right? Families provide it for 1,000 bureaucratic reasons. That's the exact number, 404,821. That's double the number of the previous year, 2020. In 2020, there were 200,305 deaths. This year's peak was March, April, right? Now, of 404,000, look, cardiovascular diseases killed 309,000. Of those 1,000, other respiratory diseases killed 285,000, that is, cardiorespiratory diseases killed 594,000. COVID killed 404,000, 405,000. Worldwide, there were 290 million cases, and deaths correspond to 1.8%. 1.8%. Now, what we're seeing today is many young deaths from sudden illness. Many. Each of us knows of cases. I even know of too many cases. It's time for Anvisa and the Ministry of Health to speak out about this. What is the cause? What happened? What's new? There's been an impure atmosphere here, an unhealthy atmosphere, a malaria epidemic in the air that's causing this, right? A physical trainer swims 10 meters and dies. A young soccer player chases the ball and dies. It's time for science to explain why, right? Well, I mentioned the vaccination certificate a little while ago. I thought Justice Lewandowski was on vacation, because during the vacation, the Supreme Court is in recess, and then, during the recess, the Chief Justice takes over, and halfway through the recess, the Vice President takes over. Justice Lewandowski was there to accept a request from the Brazilian Socialist Party, stating that the Ministry of Education's legal opinion doesn't apply. In federal educational institutions, Federal law is what applies, not state or municipal laws, right? And whether or not to require proof of vaccination. Since there's no federal law mandating it, according to the Ministry of Education, entry is free. They won't prevail over the doors of federal institutions. However, Minister Lewandowski said that universities are autonomous. What does that mean? This autonomy could contradict the Constitution. Article 5, line 15, provides for freedom of movement within the national territory in times of peace. Yet another violation of the Constitution, which is the lex legem, the law of laws, right? Well, I'd like to see if they did this with drivers. Drivers can't pick up cargo without a vaccination certificate. Speaking of drivers, the president sanctioned the so-called half-truck driver on the last night of the year. Truck drivers can be micro-entrepreneurs and have a CNPJ, National Registry of Legal Entities, be legal entities, as long as they don't earn more than $21,000 per month. They pay 12% of the minimum wage into Social Security. Individual micro-entrepreneurs, by the way, were also extended for another 5 years. The IPI exemption for taxi drivers to buy a new car and for disabled people to buy a new car adapted to their disability. Also, a provisional measure from the Student Financing Fund for poor students with low family incomes attending private colleges. There are plenty of poor students who can't afford it, who took out loans to pay for college and can't afford to pay back. So this provisional measure will do the following: a 92% discount on debt, interest, late payment fees, and interest on late payments, 0. A 92% discount to settle with Caixa Econômica and Banco do Brasil, right? In addition to a 150-month term. These are debts of people who took out loans up to 2017. I wanted to finish by talking about the Bradesco scandal. It seems like the people in Cidade de Deus are oblivious to the real Brazil, right? And this whole campaign against meat, right? Oh my God. And Bradesco first said it wasn't their business, they sent their managers. I heard audio recordings of managers recorded by many people who sent them to me, managers denying it. No, Bradesco has nothing to do with this. Then Bradesco himself leaves the managers high and dry, admitting it was a mistake and apologizing, right? What a mess, what a mess. Still based on the error, the cow's fart has been gone for a long time. Evolution took care of that. What we have is the burp of ruminants, which in cattle produces 3% of the world's methane. Here in Brazil, it produces 0, I wrote it down, 0.37% of the world's methane, and they made all this noise, the Bradesco cows, right? Hey, guys, they're in trouble, right? They're in trouble, just like that other bank that put a naked man out there for the children to look at. They're becoming alienated. I don't know what's going on. They don't know the real Brazil. They know that little island, and they're under the influence of that little island. And then this happens. They must be very sorry. From Brasilia, Alexander Garcia. M.
Olá, minhas amigas e meus amigos. Chegou a hora do nosso encontro nesta terça-feira, 13 de junho, dia de Santo Antônio. Eu postei uma foto que fiz num Santo Antônio, aqui de casa, no Instagram. E muita festa hoje em Lisboa, né? É o padroeiro de Lisboa, onde ele nasceu. E morreu em Pádua, é conhecido como Santo Antônio de Pádua, Santo Antônio de Lisboa. Morreu em Pádua em 1231, mais ou menos. Ele não tinha chegado aos 40 anos. Eu estive lá na Basílica e vi os restos mortais de Santo Antônio. Mas Lisboa hoje é grande festa. Santo casamenteiro. Dizem que ele ajudava as mulheres pobres que iam casar a fazer o enxoval para o casamento. E num dia como hoje começou oficialmente, em 1990, a derrubada do Muro de Berlim, que foi erguido em 1961, para evitar que os alemães fugissem do regime comunista. 1961, durou quase 30 anos esse muro. Tiveram que fazer um muro. Eu estive lá numa espécie de andaime em que a gente olhava por cima do muro, acompanhado de um amigo meu, deputado do Partido Socialista, Cândido Norberto, também colega de rádio. E eu lembro que subimos, a gente olhava para trás e via Berlim toda colorida, andando, agitada, dinâmica, e lá na frente, depois do muro, aquela coisa cinzenta, triste, né? Meio parada. Eu lembro que disse: ô Cândido, e aí? Regime socialista é o melhor? Aí ele me olhou e disse: cala a boca. Né? É isso, né? Isso que faz a Venezuela se derreter e o sistema esquerdista lá da Argentina também se derreter. Para a gente pensar, né? Para a gente pensar. Então, se inscreva se ainda não fez isso e, ao final, não esqueça de deixar o gostei ou não gostei. Vamos, então, aos assuntos de hoje. Bom, primeiro assunto de hoje, eu queria registrar que eu acho que o nosso presidente da República do Brasil nunca teve a curiosidade de ler Maquiavel, de ler O Príncipe, né? Porque ele faz exatamente o contrário do que Maquiavel recomenda ao príncipe, que o príncipe faça. É um grande pensador político, o Nicolau Maquiavel, ou Niccolò Maquiavello. Está fazendo o contrário, sabe, no caso da ministra do Turismo, Daniela do Vaguinho. Já vem o desgaste há uns 5 dias, e ele vai se desgastando junto aos partidos que supostamente lhe dariam apoio, no caso União Brasil. Isso já aconteceu com o carro popular, que foi aquele desgaste, né? O desgaste de dizer que de brigar com o agro, né? Que, aliás, ano que vem a gente pode ter surpresa ruim, né? E essas histórias aí do arcabouço que decide, não decide, e vai se desgastando, né? Para acabar com a privatização da Eletrobras, tirar a autonomia do Banco Central, obrigar o Banco Central a baixar juro, essas coisas que não se resolvem, mas que provocam desgaste, e muito desgaste. E agora está se desgastando. Agora a ministra foi o marido, prefeito de Belford Roxo, foi com ela falar com Lula e pronto, ela continua ministra, né? Daqui não sai, daqui ninguém me tira. Que falta de amor próprio, né? Que coisa importante é ser secretário e ajudante do presidente da República, em vez de representar os seus eleitores, que é uma coisa nobilíssima, né? Mas é assim que pensa a cabeça política. Aí o Elmar Nascimento, que é líder da União Brasil, que é o partido do qual ela se desfiliou, diz que ela não representa mais o partido, que deve ser cota particular do Lula. Só que o partido tem 59 deputados federais e 50 podem deixar o governo correr sozinho e não votar mais no governo, enquanto não for atendido. E o que o partido quer é que o deputado lá do Pará, que foi eleito para ser deputado, né, vire ministro do turismo. Deve ser um grande conhecedor do turismo, deve ter viajado para todos os países do mundo, né, deve ter estudado o turismo no Japão, no interior do Japão, na China, na muralha da China, lá no exército de terracota, deve ter visto como Singapura trata o turista, Hong Kong, as viagens para o Outback australiano, o Pantanal da Austrália, as maravilhas da Nova Zelândia, deve conhecer tudo isso. Quer ser ministro do turismo, né? Para planejar, deve conhecer tudo do Chile, as regiões vinícolas do norte, de Salta, de Mendoza, do Vale do Uco, deve saber tudo, né? O Aconcagua ali atraindo gente, né? Eu acabei de falar, Mendoza já é Argentina do outro lado do Aconcagua, né? Do lado de cá do Aconcagua. Como é que o Panamá explora o canal do Panamá para o turismo no Caribe, né? Os americanos atraindo com os shows, com Nova York, com São Francisco, com Chicago, aquela cidade maravilhosa na frente dos lagos, deve saber tudo, né? Para ser ministro do turismo, deve saber que a Torre Eiffel, um único monumento de Paris, tem mais turista anualmente que o Brasil inteiro. E deve ter algum motivo para isso e tem que resolver o motivo, que é falta de segurança, falta de informação, falta de limpeza, né? Com todas as belezas naturais que temos no Pantanal, Foz do Iguaçu, Nordeste, Lençóis Maranhenses, né? A Amazônia, as praias